Today we're going to be going over some of the basics of training, how to build out a program, how to build out a single session, and how to have success in whatever your goals are for your physical fitness. We're going to start by breaking things down into categories and then addressing each one of those categories individually. However, there are going to be a lot of crossover principles that you guys can use in your training. Like warming up, for instance, is going to be the same basically across all fitness goals and categories. But first, let's just go over what those categories are. And these are things that I don't claim to be the end all be all, but this is something that I've just really observed over the past 10 years in coaching a couple thousand clients. So first is strength. So if you want to get stronger, just move more mass, then we're going to be looking at a certain type of training just for that. And then there's endurance, which is, we'll just define as moving yourself for an extended period of time. We're looking usually to extend the duration of your work at a low level. And then there's sport-specific stuff. Obviously, this has the widest variety of all the categories, but this is targeted for a specific event or sport where you are going to be training for a test. Then it's going to be aesthetics. This is just looking better naked. It doesn't matter if you're losing fat or gaining muscle. You want to see a change in the mirror. And then last but not least, there's all of the above. This is the most common of all of the training modalities or goals that I hear from clients, is that they want all of the above. The thing to note with the all of the above option is that this is going to be the least impactful in any one category. So yes, you will improve your strength and your endurance and your aesthetics, but you're not going to have success as if you were focusing on one of those. So there's some takeaways, some give and take, I should say, with that category. Before we get into any specific category of fitness goals and how to approach those, we're going to talk about the things that aren't going to change no matter what category that you're going into. So first, we're going to talk about how to start, period, which is make a plan. So first thing we're going to do with our plan is we're going to go through the why, what, how, and this is just to get us in the right mindset, to get us in the right direction, and then to also figure out how we're going to get where we want to go. So why do you want to make a change is actually pretty important. This doesn't have to be super convoluted. It does have to be very personal though. So you should identify why you want to make a change in the first place, because that is going to be something that you're going to have to keep going back to when you start to bump up against loss of motivation. Right? When it just starts to become something that you have to be determined on, and you've made a commitment to yourself because you want to make this change because X, right? One really good one that I heard from a grandma is that she was at an amusement park with her grandkids, and then they couldn't latch the seat in a roller coaster because she had gained so much weight. She wanted to make a change because she wanted to ride roller coasters with her grandkids. There's really not a better why out there than that. So figure out what your why is, why you want to make a change now. Okay, what is the next piece? What do you want to do? What does the change look like? What does that mean for you? Does it mean that you need to make a change because you want to go climb a mountain? Well, that looks like climbing a mountain. That's the what. Does it look like you losing fat or gaining muscle? That's the what. That establishes what we are going to do, and then we need to figure out how we're going to do it. So how is going to be the thing that you actually start to make some specific goals around, because this is going to be the actionable items to get us to our what, right? So if I want to gain muscle, then I need to, one, start eating to gain muscle, and two, start training to gain muscle. That's my how. I'm going to eat a lot of protein and I'm going to work out a lot. That's my how, and I'm going to start making goals around my how. So this is what it looks like when we start to make a plan. We start with our goal. So let's just say I want to get a six-pack, right? So what does my 1 year, my 3 month, and my 1 week look like? So in the fitness world, we call this our macro, our meso, and our micro cycles. So macro cycle is big picture, like a season in sports is a macro. Then our meso is how we break things up into smaller manageable chunks so that we focus on one thing at a time. And then our micro is the daily. What does that look like? Or in this case, the week. So our macro is I want to lose 30 pounds of fat and I want to gain 10 pounds of muscle, and that will put me in a six-pack scenario. So this one doesn't have to be super specific, and it really doesn't have to be something that's guaranteed. Like, you don't have to do a lot of research. It can be an educated guess, and that's going to point you in the right direction. Then if we go a little bit closer into the 3 months, what does that mesocycle look like? Well, this 3 months I want to just lose 5 pounds of fat, and then I want to move more. I want to run more. Okay, so that is going to give me a little bit more narrow, but it's still pretty broad. And then the week or the day, this is my micro. This is the thing that I need to be specific on, because this is what I'm going to track. Okay, we don't think about trying to reach this goal. We try to reach these goals, and these are all actionable. Okay, this isn't something that's vague. It's something that I can say I did it or I didn't do it. This should be my checklist. Okay, so work out 4 to 5 times a week, and then I'm going to track my food daily, drink 10 glasses of water daily. That could be do 30 minutes of walking daily. So these are our checklists, and we live by the checklists, because we can say we accomplished it or we didn't. There is some definitive data that we can go back and see, have I been consistent or not? And consistency is the key to any goal. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do with your body or with exercise. You have to try to stay consistent. So it's all about how we can build out the micro to serve the macro. Okay? So now that we have our plan, let's start talking about some of the principles that we're going to use in all of the training, no matter what it is. The first one is going to be a holistic approach. No matter what type of training you're going to be doing, you want a holistic approach to it. So this is the example of the holistic approach. It's kind of like the nutrition cycle that we talked about, but it's going to start with fueling your body or preparing your body for creating a stimulus, which then you have to recover from, and you repeat the cycle over and over and over again until you start to see results. And you won't see results unless you're meeting all 3 of those criteria and you're moving through. If you're trying to give your body a stimulus by training without being properly fueled, then you're not going to have as good of a training session. If you're giving your body a stimulus without the recovery, then what you're doing is you're breaking the tissue without allowing it to regenerate, and we are breaking and not building. And really, between the recovery and the repeating of the fueling, that's where we see the most change in the results that you're going to get. Okay, so make sure that you're fitting everything together like we're talking about in the Catalyst program through phases 1 through 3, which again is the nutrition, the training, and the recovery. Okay, and this is a hierarchy just to show you where the importance lies. Okay, so starting with our sleep, that is going to be the most important thing. If we don't get good sleep, we're not recovering, and we're also not preparing ourselves well for eating. Disruption in sleep actually does have an impact on your metabolism, and then how we can absorb the nutrients and prepare our bodies to train, which is the top of the pyramid, but also it's kind of the least important in order of operations that you have to make sure you're consistent at before you'll start to see results. Okay, now the next one is going to be mechanics, consistency, intensity. So it doesn't matter if you're doing Olympic weightlifting, if you're doing swimming, if you're doing biking, if you're doing bodybuilding. What we have to focus on first is the positions that we're supposed to hit, how we're supposed to hit them. That's the mechanics of our movement. Then we need to do that consistently before we start to add on any load or speed or duration, which is the intensity. Now, the intensity piece is where we start to see the results. So we have to get to the intensity, but make sure that you do it in the correct order and you're not skipping to the intensity. if you skip right to here, instead of seeing good results, what you're going to see is most likely injuries. Okay. Then number 3, the last one, is going to be longevity over everything. We want to focus on our longevity, how long we can keep in this sport or training modality. And we want to focus on that before we focus on anything else. I see a lot of athletes who will sacrifice the long term for the short term gains. And trust me, that is not the way to, 1, get the best results, and 2, be happy when you're in your older age because you've put too much wear and tear on your joints. You'll thank me later if you actually listen to this advice. So what does that look like? It means warming up on a consistent basis. We're doing a thorough warm-up before we go into our movement. We're cooling down after we've done our movement. We're doing our stretching and our mobility work so that we can hit the correct positions without putting too much tension on our connective tissue, and we have a balanced approach. Okay, so I'm not hammering 5 days in a row and then taking 2 days completely off. I want to have balance in everything that I do. I'm going to work hard and I'm going to recover well, and that's how I can go on for the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, an example on the longevity piece is I've only really gotten good at CrossFit in the past 5 years, and I've been doing it for 11 years. The first 3 years, I went really hard. I was in my early 20s, and I tried to push as hard as I could every single time I was in the gym. And there's nothing wrong with that, but my nutrition and my sleep wasn't in the right place. And so I was starting to see injury after injury after injury, and I wasn't getting to where I needed to go. And in the past 5 years, I flipped my view on this, and I started to prioritize the recovery a little bit more and the intensity a little bit less, so that I had a more balanced approach. And that's actually where I started to see the most gains. And that's also because I had been doing it for 11 years. We need to start to set you up so that you can keep training for a long period of time, because the most results are going to come on the back end, not on the front end. The last 2 principles that we're going to talk about that applies to all training methodologies is progressive overload and deload. So starting with progressive overload, this is just where we're working to our max capacity just about every session we do. So we're going to try to push the limits of our physical capabilities, and then over time, we will adapt to that stimulus. So if I push myself to failure, then my body will adapt. As long as I'm giving it enough fuel and enough recovery, it will adapt to the stimulus that I gave it. So the next time I have to give it a little bit more to get the same type of adaptation. So this is what's called a linear progression, but that doesn't actually work forever. Progression usually looks a little bit more like this, where we start to see diminishing returns the longer that we go. So at first, I can see a big increase in my capacity, but over time, that's going to start to taper off and maybe even plateau, which leads us into the last principle, which is the deload phases that we need to put in our programming and in our training, which is this graph just on a longer timeline. So I start to see that plateau. What I would do is I would take a deload week. That's this little line where I don't work for a little bit. And this can be done in a couple different ways. One is just straight deload. I'm not working at all. I take a complete rest. Or I could just take a rest on that specific muscle group or that specific movement, and I can move my training over and do something else for a little bit. So let's just say my back squat, okay? I'm gonna start at 100 pounds, and then I work my way up to 150 pounds, but then to get to 155 takes a long time, and then I feel like I'm just kind of stuck at 155 for the set amount of reps. Then I take a deload week, and I start back at like 150. I go back down a little bit, work my way up, but then when I start to hit my peak, then it's going to be 160, 165, and then I get stuck there, and I do another deload week, and I start back down at like 155 again, and I work my way back up. So that's the process that we go on the deload. It's just something so that when we see the improvement over time, it looks linear like this, but that's just an average out of all of the training that we're doing. Really, when you start a linear progression, you'll hit a plateau and then you'll have to take a little bit of a break before you move on. Typically, a cycle like this will go on for months. It depends on how long you've been training, but I would say about every 12 weeks or so is when you would start to go through a full cycle, which is what we call a mesocycle, which is building up, starting to hit the peak of our performance, and then at the end of it, we would take a little bit of rest before we enter our next mesocycle of 12 weeks or so.